Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, if you're the kind of person who literally cringes at the mere thought of taking a break, where even just sitting down to watch a single episode of a show sends a weird spike of panic right through your chest, this one is absolutely for you. Today, we're diving into the source material to decode the psychology behind that hidden emotional weight. And it all points back to a pretty fascinating concept, the burden of early maturity. I mean, think about it. Have you ever felt intensely guilty just for sitting down for 5 minutes? Or maybe you felt genuinely terrible for asking a friend for the tiniest favor. It sounds totally counterintuitive, right? Rest is supposed to be the reward. But for a very specific type of person, the research shows that rest actually feels like a trap. Let's look at exactly why your nervous system might be hardwired to completely reject the comfort it so desperately needs. It turns out, for highly independent individuals, childhood doesn't just end with some sudden, dramatic event. You just quietly outgrow it. Nobody officially hands you a certificate saying, "Congratulations, you're a grown-up now." You simply wake up one day, look around at the emotional chaos or maybe the unpredictability in your house, realize that someone has to be the responsible one, and decide, well, it might as well be me. Okay, let's dive right into this because there's actually a clinical term for this phenomenon. It's called parentification. This happens when a kid is expected to manage heavy, complex emotions, either their own or the wildly unpredictable emotions of the adults around them, long before they are developmentally ready to handle it. Exploring this concept reveals the absolute root cause of why our nervous system had to adapt so drastically to extreme pressure. So, this early pressure triggers a super predictable psychological domino effect. Thrust into that kind of overwhelming environment, a young brain goes straight into survival mode. First, the kid is expected to manage adult-sized emotions. To survive and keep functioning, the brain simply suppresses its own needs. Because, hey, you can't be needy if you're busy managing everyone else's problems. Which leads to the heartbreaking final step, learning that your feelings must always, always come last. People will constantly compliment hyper-responsible adults, saying things like, "Wow, you're just so naturally tough and resilient." But the data tells a completely different story. They became strong because there was literally no other option. This extreme self-reliance, it wasn't just some natural personality trait you were born with. It was a forced necessity to survive an environment that demanded absolute strength just to keep the peace. Now, what's really interesting about the research here is this concept of survival independence. Because these kids couldn't rely on consistent support growing up, developmental psychology shows they build this impenetrable wall. They completely stop asking for help. But more profoundly, they stop expecting comfort entirely. Relying on someone else was just never a safe bet in the past, so they simply choose to handle the whole shebang alone. And this creates a massive disconnect. Outwardly, they look incredibly capable and composed, right? They're the superhero everyone else goes to for advice. But the inward reality is a whole different story. They harbor this secret, persistent inability to trust that anyone's support is actually permanent or truly safe to lean on. This dynamic actually leads to a fascinating psychological state known as split maturity. On one hand, you've got an adult who matured far too early when it comes to duty and logic. I mean, they can handle a crisis flawlessly. But on the other hand, their fundamental childhood needs for comfort, security, and just spontaneous play were left completely unmet. The result? Someone who is incredibly wise, yet internally feels constantly confused or unfulfilled. The absolutely crucial takeaway from the psychology here is that they simply never got the time to learn how to need others safely. So if you feel emotionally exhausted all the time, the research is incredibly clear on this. It is not a personal flaw. It's literally a missed developmental step. You basically skipped the early life class on how to let people take care of you because you were way too busy taking care of everyone else. Which brings us to a massive aha moment in the research. So what actually happens when they finally get a chance to relax? You'd think a quiet Sunday afternoon would be a huge relief. But for the parentified child, the moment the to-do list is finally done and the house goes quiet, this deep, pervasive anxiety sets in. Let's look at exactly why that happens. Logically, rest should be safe and calming. But for someone who grew up way too fast, rest actually feels like neglect, danger, and extreme physical unease. Why? Because back in their childhood, quiet usually meant the other shoe was about to drop. A silent house meant a storm was brewing. So today, their nervous system literally equates sitting still in a hammock or watching a movie with an impending threat.
Because of this chronic stress, early responsibility leaves behind a very specific set of subconscious beliefs. If they're being taken care of, they automatically feel like a massive burden. They completely minimize their own needs just to stay out of the way, literally apologizing for wanting even a tiny bit of support. To them, receiving care doesn't just feel slightly uncomfortable, it feels completely foreign to their system. But it's not all just burden and exhaustion. Growing up too fast actually creates some genuinely incredible psychological adaptations. It results in what psychologists call guarded empathy. It's the highly impressive, though definitely costly, flip side of early maturity. The exact struggles we just unpacked actually forge a sharpened emotional awareness that most people never, ever develop. And this brilliantly illustrates what are essentially the superpowers of early maturity. If you grew up parentified, you can sense a shift in someone's mood from a single sigh all the way across the room. You anticipate problems long before they even happen. You read people faster and way more accurately than anyone else. Your childhood hypervigilance evolved into this highly tuned, almost superhuman emotional radar. However, that powerful emotional radar definitely comes with a heavy price tag. It is the cost of caring without having any protection of your own. Sure, you can read a room perfectly, but you subconsciously stay fiercely guarded. Deep down, your nervous system still remembers the intense toll of carrying everyone else's weight without having anyone there to carry yours. If you're sitting there realizing you've been carrying this invisible weight your entire life, the absolute most important takeaway from our source material is this: psychology does not view you as broken. You are not damaged. Your nervous system simply adapted brilliantly to survive an immense amount of pressure early on. You just did exactly what you needed to do to get through it. It all comes down to the stark survival lessons you were forced to learn. You learned responsibility way before you ever learned safety. You learned ironclad strength long before you were ever allowed to experience softness. Recognizing this really highlights the incredible, sheer endurance it took to survive those early environments. And that brings us to a really beautiful realization in the research. Healing doesn't mean you're becoming weak. It means learning that you are finally allowed to rest. Dropping that armor and letting someone else take the wheel for a change, that isn't a sign of failure or vulnerability. It is the ultimate sign of healing, giving your nervous system that long overdue permission to finally stand down. If this dive into the psychology of early maturity helped clarify why you function the way you do, make sure to hit subscribe. Here on The Explainer, we don't just scroll through lives, we decode minds. But I want to leave you with one final question to think about today. If your nervous system is wired to protect you from a childhood storm that has already passed, what incredible things could happen if you finally allowed yourself to put the armor down just for 5 minutes today? Think about it, and I'll see you in the next Explainer.